We are talking to John Watson. Can you tell us a bit about your journey? How did it begin?
We went to Asia in 2006 to volunteer, which didn't work out very well because the volunteering was more for the benefit of the volunteers than for the community. So instead, we bought some crappy bikes there and we cycled in Southeast Asia, and that really gave us the opportunity to meet and spend time with and see people living with very little and getting a lot out of life. And I think that we took kind of two things from that. One is that we don't need a lot of stuff to be happy, and we'd already sort of studied a little bit of philosophy around that, and that was just really consolidating that idea for us. And the other was that if we're going to do good in the world, then we're much better off working in Australia and giving to an effective charity rather than trying to actually apply our labour in the countries that we were supporting. So we kind of took both of those tenets on board back in 2006 and have lived most of our life along those lines. We did find a few years ago, though, that we were really getting sidetracked trying to fit in, trying to be worried about the state of the future. We turned to doomsday prepping, which is a really high consumption, rather right-wing activity where you're afraid of other people. And that really kind of undermined all those values and put us in a place where we had a lot of internal conflict, which we didn't really acknowledge. And that showed up in also with the secrecy and kind of shame around those things. It's a pretty extreme perspective, and trying to balance it with our environmental ideals and our ideals of fairness. It ended in a place with a lot of conflict, internal and external. And we realised that we'd really just fallen into the same traps of consumption and performative behaviours that make us good consumers and good citizens and a part of the problem rather than a part of the solution.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, in your opinion, doomsday prepping is a part of that consumption model to, I guess, stockpile and make sure that you've got everything you would ever need
it's
at
almost,
your hands.
It's almost
very
like
individualism.
It is, yeah, that's right.
Individualistic.
It kind of takes capitalism to the extreme. Like if you realise that you've won at your basic survival, now you're looking at future survival, but it's all about the individual, and it's also all driven by fear, fear of other people. And it was actually during that phase of let's call it crisis. There was a bunch of those environmental things happening where we were exposed to flood and fire, including on our property. It ended up burning down. The irony of it, and the relationship challenges. And a friend of mine who did have some insight into the prepping mindset actually gave me a book, Rebecca Solnit, A Paradise Built in Hell, which documents how people actually respond in the case of disaster and like a small-scale societal breakdown over the 20th and 21st century. And that was really quite the opposite of the picture that we imagined. People didn't become these monsters. In fact, for a lot of people involved in that process, this is the highlight of their lives, where they could had an excuse not to go to work. They could do things that really mattered, and they tended just to always pull together. And the only people in those circumstances who were problematic were preppers and government, both concerned about their material possessions, well-being, and maintaining control and order.
Yeah, I think that's a pervasive myth, maybe, that when disasters happen, people or groups, maybe the community goes into panic. But from what I've seen in disasters I've been a part of, is exactly the opposite. We come together, and mutual aid becomes a bigger part of our well-being.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And when you look at historical breakdowns or kind of miniature collapse scenarios, like it's happened in Latin America with the collapse of the Soviet Union and so on, the same thing has happened. There's definitely been, in some instances, increase in violence. Often, though, it's driven because of larger organisations that are doing that, whereas the majority of people are just wanting to help out their neighbours. And even when you look at the most extreme cases with famines through the 20th century, which were again government induced, and millions of people died of starvation, that even then there was very little interpersonal violence. People would give up their last, their last piece of bread for the well-being of others.
Yeah.
So that was a great flip back to looking at community and returning to our values. And I acknowledge that we're not the only people who are living within the planetary boundaries. In fact, there's the 1.6 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa. Between them, only consume about a third of their reasonable share of the Earth's resources.
Yeah, this is interesting. You in your blog, you talk about the numbers of Planet One life, and I assume that on average in Australia, we are part of the wealthiest 10%.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. You only need to be earning about 45,000 US, about 60,000 Australian dollars before tax, to be in the wealthiest 10% in the world.
Yeah, but it's not just that we have an income and we make $60,000, but we also have free healthcare for the most part, roads,
right.
libraries, things like this.
Yeah,
right?
There's a lot of social capital in place. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what are your practicalities about going from the wealthiest 10% to living within what would you call it? One life?
Yeah, one planet living is kind of how we've broken it down. So that's the idea that if we took all of the resources of the Earth and divided it by the population just evenly, forget about the past, even though we're obviously responsible for most of the harm. Let's just clear the slate because it's in our favour. How much would we each be able to consume? So on a day-to-day basis, for us, that means that we have committed not to fly, and it's not that flying is particularly bad in itself. It just enables really long-distance travel. Mm-hmm. A full plane is lower impact than a one person in a car, but you can only take the car so far. So along those lines, we've also then cut down our car use dramatically, and that comes with a whole bunch of co-benefits when we're mostly cycling instead. So we're spending more time outside, it's the free exercise, it's connecting with nature and community and sunlight. And as it turns out, that way of living, that much more engaged and slower way of living is very good for us across all domains, largely because we evolved in that sort of setting. Doing this moderate endurance exercise outdoors and close to other people. So of course that's how all our health systems and our chemical reward systems tell us that we're doing the right thing. And in terms of diet, I acknowledge that it's probably quite natural to have an omnivorous diet, but given the current population, it's not compatible with one planet living. So we cut down our meat consumption almost to zero and animal product consumption almost to zero for a couple of years. And then last year we also started dumpster diving. So that was the opportunity to, we're still not eating very much meat, but a little bit more rather than buying meat alternatives, but also sharing in our neighbourhood. And people won't take stuff out of the bin themselves, but if they see the condition that it's in and they're prepared to take those risks on, then they're more than happy to accept things which we take out. So in that regard, that's really like a negative impact that's happening. It's reducing consumption of meat and products. That there is obviously an increased risk for everything that you take out of the bin, but people can make their own judgment and use their senses the same as we did for thousands of years before we had date stamps and refrigerated supply chains. We also live in a really small, small by Australian standards house, a 90 square metre house that was built in the 50s. We were tempted to do a major renovation that would have doubled our floor area a few years ago, and that was kind of one of the points where we realised, hey, this is just for status. We're doing this because this is the model. Every child should have their own room, and we should have an entertaining space and all this other stuff. And it was going to cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we just worked out, hey, if we don't do that, we can retire 10 years earlier. And all we had to do really was put up a wall in our living room, we don't have a TV, which is part of the story as well, I guess, and soundproof the door. And then the kids have got their own space. If they want to fight, they can go in there, close the door, and
cage match style.
Yeah, that's right. We don't need to really even hear about it.
I think with building extra onto your house, there's that obligation that flows on about having to fill it with stuff.
That's right.
As well.
The bigger the house is, the more stuff you put in it. And we've only we've only bought second-hand stuff generally, or a lot of it is curbside pickup. We've upgraded our couch twice or three times just by returning the one which is less attractive or a little bit worn out to the curb, and it soon disappears. Someone wants it anyway, and getting a new, nicer one for our living room. So we've basically spent nothing on furniture, clothing, toys. So much already in the waste stream. So over 20 years, I think we've probably spent 1 or 2% of typical spending on household goods, which have a relatively high turnover, and our low-cost living has meant that now at 41, my wife and I are retired effectively.
Wow.
Because you put that money that you're not spending into passive investments. We didn't do it very well in particular, but we recognise that we won at capitalism by being born in Australia. We're not super wealthy. We've got a net worth of about $2 million, but the net returns on that means that we live on about half of that, the return from that, and we give the other half away to effective charities, which we have come to know more closely. The Life You Can Save is one that we trying to funnel the giving through, because there's a difference between a charity that, say in Australia, a guide dog costs about $50,000 to train, one guide dog that helps one blind person. If we give that money to an effective charity working in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia, then an eye surgery to cure blindness costs about $83.
Yeah, right.
So there's you can do hundreds of times more good than you by giving effectively. So we've really kind of tried to balance out, optimize our life in a way that that's good for us, good for the planet, and helps to address some of the inequality that we don't really have another mechanism to do. And coming back to your comments about what can we do about the situation in Iran before.
Oh, yep.
While the music was playing. So obviously if we reduce our demand for resources, then we reduce the motivation for conflict. And I think that that's something that we need to highlight, that we can just blame the perpetrators. We can just blame corporations or government or whatever else, who do obviously have a responsibility. They can act differently, but they have no motivation to, because we're still in a market economy. We create demand for a product. They have an incentive to produce that product. All of the conflicts that you referred to really revolve around oil or other resources, but oil is really the strict one. So if we can drive less and transition to lower resource lifestyle, then every reason for conflict kind of evaporates pretty quickly. There is across the globe an absolute abundance because of the way that efficiency has developed under the market economy and capitalism. Everyone can live a decent lifestyle if we can help address some of that inequality and look to a life that has its meaning. Look, if we start to value the things that serve us well, rather than just follow the kind of default model which is put in front of us. And no one's to blame for that, of course. We've just every story that's told is generally about the wealthy hero who has all the things going for him, and then that automatically becomes our aspirations. I recognise Batman as one of my childhood models, but he's a loner. When you actually break it down to his life, it's probably pretty quite miserable. But I still found myself several times on this. I just want that fast car, and I want the man cave, and and all the technology, and to be rich, of course. So you have all the power and influence.
So you had to, I guess, talk yourself out of those status symbols.
Yeah. I think that it took a crisis. I guess it took the experience in Asia at first to see, hang on, this is not, we don't need all that stuff, but still being surrounded by it again, and just in daily engagement and everything that you see everywhere, not just advertising that's really tuned to make us want stuff, but every story, as I say, every TV show, every movie is showing a life to aspire to. And one of the biggest exports from the West to the rest of the world has been media, film and TV, and that has also created this attraction to a lifestyle that ultimately is far worse in many ways than indigenous or traditional lifestyles, where people remain close to their families and value the chill out time, and and respect the holidays and festivities, and it's very easy to get waylaid. And you're right, we had to come to the realization of basically via the symptoms that we had fallen too far back into that path.
Yeah. Have you heard the story that the individual carbon footprint was the brainchild of a BP PR team? That tells people that climate change isn't a mining company's fault. It's the fault of people drinking from plastic bottles or not taking public transport enough. Have you heard of this?
I have heard that, and unfortunately, it serves as a bit of a deflection, and people cite that over and over again as reasons why they shouldn't be doing something more on an individual level. But it's not a case of either or. If we can change the demand on the market, then it changes their incentives. We can also push for stronger regulation and better taxation policies and addressing all of the externalities. The reason often that buying a new thing is cheaper than fixing an old thing is because the new thing doesn't account for all of the damages that go into its manufacture and its disposal. So I think that there is a limited truth to the story about BP and the carbon footprint, but even before then and after then, a lot of independent research has looked at what is an individual's responsibility, like how can we break it down, and using different models besides carbon footprint. And I think, as I said before, we can just get caught up in the trying to blame one person or another. But in all regards, if we can take more accountability for our own stuff, then we're empowered by doing that. Rather than for as long as we think it's someone else's problem, it's disempowering, and it's easy to lose hope that anything's ever going to happen. I think that the best thing we can do is accept that there isn't really a lot of hope in other people doing stuff or other corporations doing stuff, and we can't rely on just hope. It's kind of it's wishing something to happen, but we can take stuff into our own hands and take control of that situation by how we spend our money, how productive we kind of choose to be. You're talking about before, just by earning $60,000, we're not automatically doing harm, but the reality is we spend that money. And we spend it on tax, which we don't control exactly how that goes. We can try and vote that to be favourable to us. But everything else that we spend it on pretty much does harm. So we can choose the things that do the least harm and the most good, and cut down our own individual impacts. And we can support organisations, either lobby organisations or through voting or through NGOs. We can support organisations that align with the things which we do see as important. And that can be a very effective way of spending that money, which actively reduces harm.
So have you had a lot of pushback on your lifestyle then, from people saying this isn't maybe practical, or this isn't what other people are able to do?
I think that there is definitely a risk of preaching or proselytizing, and then people will just get defensive. I think we've had actually very little pushback this time around. In 2008 to 2010 or thereabouts, my wife and I were very ascetic. We were living without hot water, without a car, without a fridge, and we were preaching at every opportunity. There was an urgency to make change, and we alienated people. People can't just go from where they are now to a one planet lifestyle with a snap of the fingers. There's a lot of stuff we've got to deal with kind of internally before we can get there. And I think that even just accepting that the dreams that we have aren't our own dreams is a really kind of slow, it's a process that takes several steps to kind of get there. Why do I want the things that I want? And so I think this time around we've been much wiser, and I guess 20 years, whatever does that, to accepting people where they're at. People haven't chosen the lifestyle that they have necessarily all that deliberately. People don't want to do harm. They don't want to destroy the planet. They're the only one that we've got, but often they feel as though this is the only way that's going to serve them and sort of do good things in their life. So instead, we recognise that change, and there's been a lot of progressive change across the course of history and social movements. very few of them are successful. Like something like 1 in 30 social uprising or social movements is successful, but 1 in 30 means that over the course of the last 100 generations or so, the world is far more ethical, moral, kinder, less exploitative, whatever, than it was, at the time of the rise of civilization, and the Dark Ages and so on. And so we can look to how do we live now? What model can we create that will lead to change over the course of a generation? And it's difficult to do that kind of with patience, because we can see so many natural systems and political systems and economic whatever kind of falling apart around us. We kind of like want to drive urgent change, but it's not realistically going to happen. It's just going to cause a lot of sort of frustration and anger. So much better just to do what we can do, share the message, and that's why we have the blog here. Other people I think don't recognise how much more they could do because they're not seeing it out there. The models that we have generally have higher consumption. And like we were inspired to dumpster dive for the first time after kind of wanting to do it for a few years by seeing someone else doing it, by seeing Robin Greenfield, the American activist, doing it. And on his blog he says that if anyone gets prosecuted worldwide, he has a fund there to cover their legal costs.
Yeah, right.
And I don't think it's actually happened in Australia. It's illegal to trespass if you go into like an enclosed area or the signage to that effect. But anything that is reasonably abandoned is fair game.
Yes.
So product that's gone into bins is fair game. Obviously, if anyone listening to this intends to go out dumpster diving, I just caution that it's for some people this might be their only if it's food, might be their only sustenance or their only source of income if there's something that they're reselling, and we don't want to mess it up for them. Yep. So we my wife and I certainly could afford to shop completely normally. We've chosen to reduce waste instead, and we try and do that as absolutely respectfully as possible, which involves, if we're in the bin, for instance, we might sort what's in the bin so that the stuff that is really not fit for consumption is kind of out of the way. Mm-hmm. If someone comes after us, they'll have a better experience than we did, and we try and leave the whole area tidier than it was, because we don't want to create problems for other people who are diving. We don't want to create problems with the staff. What happened in the US when dumpster diving became a big thing, it's kind of over the past 30 years, is more and more bins get locked up.
Yes.
And then no one has access to that, and more is wasted. So, there's a lot to kind of consider. It's not just a case of going.
You give the bin a bit of an organising, so that the bin people who operate the bins.
Oh, they're just going to flip it into a truck. But if someone comes dumpster diving after us, we want them to see that there's in-date or just gone past date bread here, produce here. If there's meat there, put it into the middle so that if we haven't taken it, so that it's going to stay cooler for a little bit longer. And if there's a great mess, sometimes there's loose flour, or sugar, or potting mix or something in there. Try and keep it out of the way from all being mixed up. Yeah. And we won't dive in an area where we know there's a homeless population. So we know that there's bins around the valley here and the city. We won't even take a look. Yeah. We're in suburban areas where we've encountered one other diver in the last 4 months, and we know that she appeared to have been in reasonably dire circumstances. So we'll take a reasonable portion and leave whatever it is that leave something for her to collect if she comes after us. No guarantee of that, of course. Yeah.
This is fascinating, John. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there one thing that you want to leave our listeners with about your lifestyle?
Probably the least popular one, and and I'll just share it when it comes back to the one change that has the most universal impact across all domains, because we just talked about carbon, but obviously there's a whole bunch of other planetary boundaries that apply as well, and that is the diet change. Not to dumpster diving. I'm not actually advocating dumpster diving. I think that if you want to go to the next level, it's there. But substituting beef and dairy for beans and soy or oat products instead, that reduces potentially reduces individual carbon impacts by about a third, which is a huge step, more than anything else we can do. But it also reduces land pressure demand, pesticide, insecticide, biodiversity threats,
Yep.
water consumption, like across the whole gamut. So beef for beans is kind of the little catchphrase that we'll throw out there. And I also acknowledge that it's not easy to do. There's so much pressure in Australia to consume meat, like it's manly to consume meat.
Yep.
It's Australian to consume meat. There's so many kind of patriotic and
The lamb
gender-
ads,
it
a
is
yearly,
crazy. Yeah,
people applaud them.
yeah, incredible. But there's plenty of famous people who are vegan, including sports people and bodybuilders and movie stars and whatever else. Like to tie an identity into a diet, I feel like is part of our overall falling apart. You know, putting everyone's identity on the line and creating division where there really doesn't need to be any, and even just a reduction. You know, it's there doesn't need to be such a big deal as we make of it. Although there's of course money on the line,
Yeah.
so it's always going to be.
All right, well, thank you, John. Where can people find you?
We are across most of the social media platforms, which I know is ironic because we want people to get off of them. But we also just have a website, livingmorewithless.org, which is independent of any of the social media platforms and is ad-free and will remain so. And we link through to other people's stories from there as well, because we know, like I said, we know we're not the only ones living this way, and we really just want to pull the stories together to help inspire people and set them on the path if that's what they're interested in.
Yeah, and like you said at the start of the show, you can't do this stuff without community.
No, I think community is that's the number one thing in terms of resilience and resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting it all together.
All right, fantastic.